The station had no windows. That was the first thing most visitors noticed about Coalition High Command. The deliberate absence of space outside. No stars. No drifting debris. No reminder of the vast, cold thing they were all floating inside. The architects had made that choice on purpose. You think better, they said, when you cannot see how small you are. Admiral Owen Dasick had worked in the station for 11 years. He had stopped noticing the missing windows a long time ago. Tonight, though, he noticed. He sat at the long table in the briefing chamber alone, and he thought about the Battle of Meridian Gate, and he wished he could see the stars. 6 months ago, the Kareth had pushed through the Eastern Corridor with 3 fleet divisions and a ground force that outnumbered everything the Coalition had. On that side of the rim, Dasick had been watching the engagement from a command ship 2 sectors away, routed through relay screens and officer reports. He had watched the Coalition's 7th Mobile Division begin to collapse. He had watched the eastern flank fold. He had started drafting the language of a tactical withdrawal, clean words. Bad thing when the human unit arrived. They were not supposed to be there. Humanity had been formally admitted to the Coalition 7 weeks prior. Their contribution was still being negotiated. They had no assigned sector, no integrated command structure, no authorization for combat deployment. The unit that came through the Meridian Gate corridor had no orders anyone could find afterward. There were 11 of them. 11 humans moving on foot through a Kareth forward line in the middle of an active engagement, without air cover, without Coalition backup, without anything that made tactical sense. Dasick had watched the feed and assumed for almost 4 minutes that they were going to die. They did not die. What they did instead was something Dasick had been turning over in his mind every single day for 6 months. They retreated, visibly clearly, in a way the Kareth pursuit force could track. They ran. The Kareth followed. Of course they followed. A retreating enemy is a gift. The Kareth pursuit force moved fast and eager into a corridor that the 11 humans had spent the previous 40 minutes quietly preparing. The word trap was not large enough for what happened next. Dasick set down his data tablet. The briefing chamber door opened, and the Coalition liaison officer, a young Salak officer named Preth, ambitious and precise, entered with a portfolio under one arm. Admiral, the human attaché will be here in 20 minutes. Preth set the portfolio on the table. I've prepared the standard request. Documentation. Formal embed, 6-week rotation joint. Operational framework. That's fine, Dasick said. Preth paused. He had worked for Dasick long enough to know when that's fine meant something was not fine. Sir, are you certain about this request? The tactical board has concerns about integration timelines. Human military doctrine doesn't map cleanly to Coalition command structure. The language barriers alone. The unit I'm requesting doesn't rely on command structure, Dasick said. That's the point. Preth opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. The Kareth holds 6 of our prisoner coordinates in deep rim space. We have been unable to mount a successful extraction for 4 months. The environments are hostile, the patrol density is high, and every conventional approach has failed. You are requesting a 4-person human special operations team to Yes. 4, Preth said. People. The unit recommended 4. I agreed. Preth looked at the portfolio. He looked at Dasuk. He set the portfolio down with the careful precision of someone who had very strong feelings and had decided not to express them. I will prepare the authorization documents. Thank you, Preth. The liaison left. Dasuk picked up the personnel files that had come in from the human military authority 3 days prior. He had read them 4 times. He read them again now. The team leader was a man named Cal Duran, 34 years old. 14 years of service, most of it in environments and operations whose details were redacted in the version Dasuk received. The psychological profile used the phrase exceptional threat calibration. The fitness report said he was quiet. Someone had underlined the word quiet in the margin, and Dasuk could not tell if it was a compliment or a warning. The intelligence specialist was Nora Voss, 29. She had 3 commendations for work in environments where she had been the only human speaker among non-human groups. Her evaluation said she demonstrated cross-species pattern recognition at a level our instruments may not fully measure. Dasuk read that sentence twice. The demolition specialist was Leon Hatch, 26. His file was the thinnest and the strangest. The psychological evaluation had a section titled Behavioral Observations that took up 2 full pages, and the summary conclusion at the bottom simply said operationally reliable. Dasuk was a man who had read thousands of military files. Operationally reliable after 2 pages of behavioral observations was not a clean bill of health. It was a diplomatic sentence. The 4th was Danny Prude, 22 years old. The youngest. She had been flagged 3 times during training for what the evaluators called a typical stress response. She did not panic. Under extreme simulated pressure, she became, in the words of one evaluator, dangerously calm. Dasuk set the files down. He thought about the word dangerous. He thought about the way it sat next to the word calm and how no species in the coalition would ever put those 2 words together that way, because for every other species calm was the absence of danger. It was the place you arrived at after the threat was gone. For Danny Prude, apparently calm was a weapon. The chamber door opened again. The human military attaché entered. Tall woman named Colonel Grace Merritt, gray at the temples with the particular quality of stillness that Dasuk had come to associate with humans who had seen a great deal. She sat across from him without being invited to sit. He did not mind. You read the files, she said. 4 times. And Dasuk thought about it honestly. I have a question about Corporal Hatch. Grace Merritt almost smiled. Everyone does. The behavioral report. He's fine, she said. He's better than fine. He's the best breacher we have in the Western Theater. She folded her hands on the table. He laughs. In bad situations. We know. It's not a problem. It's actually it works for the team. Leon laughing means the team knows he's still thinking clearly. If he stops laughing, that's when they worry. Dasuk processed this for a moment. A soldier whose laughter was a positive signal to his team. He wrote a short note on his tablet and decided he would think about it later. The mission parameters have been sent. To your command, he said. Deep Rim. Karath held space. Prisoner coordinate extraction. No air support window for the first 18 hours. Your team will be accompanied by Commander Vreth of my staff for joint operational oversight. Grace Merritt nodded slowly. My team will accept that. Cal will want to meet Vreth before deployment. Of course. She stood. She picked up nothing she had brought. Nothing. She paused at the door. Admiral, can I ask why for? We can send more. We have. 4 is what the mission requires, Dasik said. Your sergeant said so. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes that Dasik could not read. Cal said 4. Yes. Okay, she said. That was all. The door closed. Dasik sat in the windowless room. He thought about 11 humans at the battle of Meridian Gate. He thought about the specific mathematics of what they had done, not the courage of it, which was obvious, but the engineering of it, the patience, the ability to appear to lose deliberately in order to win. He thought about Admiral Grath, his Karath counterpart, who had received a battlefield report 6 months ago that said 11 humans had just ended a Karath pursuit force of over 200. Dasik wondered what Grath had thought. He wondered if Grath had understood yet what was coming. He almost felt sorry for the Karath. Almost a commander Vreth had met soldiers before. He had met Salak heavy infantry, who stood 2 m tall and carried weapons that could split whole plating. He had met Drevian shock troops who moved in perfect formation and had not lost a ground engagement in 60 years. He had met the Hesari border guard who were small and fast and operated in units of 30 with the coordinated precision of a single organism. He thought he understood what soldiers looked like. The 4 humans who stepped off the transit shuttle at forward operating base count looked like they had come from somewhere else entirely. Not from a war. From something more casual than that. The big one, Leon Hatch, was eating something out of a silver packet and looking at the base like he was deciding whether he liked the neighborhood. The small one, Danny Prout, had her jacket collar turned up against the base's recycled air and was watching the ceiling vents with mild professional curiosity. Nora Voss was already scanning the base layout with the quiet rotating attention of someone cataloging exits, and Calderin was standing slightly apart from all of them, not looking at anything in particular, which meant Vreth would realize this later. He was looking at everything. Vreth approached them. He was a coalition commander of 12 years. He had a formal greeting prepared. Calderin looked at him first. He looked at him in a way that was not aggressive and not submissive, and was somehow both of those things at once. Complete flat assessment that lasted about 1 seconds and then was done. Whatever conclusion Durin reached, he kept it behind his face. Commander Vreth, Durin said. Not a question. He had done his reading. Sergeant Durin. Vreth extended the standard coalition formal greeting, right hand open. Pressed briefly to the chest. Durin matched it without hesitation, which meant he had done his reading. 2. This is your base, Durin said. For the next 6 days it's yours, Vreth said. He meant it as a courtesy. He watched something very small pass between the 4 humans. No words, no gesture he could identify, and understood that they had already begun assessing the base the moment they arrived. The courtesy was unnecessary. They were already home. He showed them to their quarters. Leon Hatch looked at the Coalition sleeping unit, a reclined gel platform, temperature regulated, standard issue, and said, "We're going to need to move these." Vreth stopped. "Move them against the walls. We sleep with our backs covered." Leon was already dragging his platform. He did not ask for help. He did not explain further. Vreth stood in the doorway and watched. All four of them rearrange Coalition furniture in under 3 minutes, and when they were done, the room looked like a completely different room, tighter, more defensible, oriented toward the single door. They had done it without discussing it. That was the first thing that kept Vreth awake that night. Meals were the second. The base food supply was calibrated for Coalition biology, high mineral content, low-fat controlled proteins. Leon Hesh opened the supply cabinet, looked at it for a long moment, and then produced from his personal kit a collection of small packages that contained things Vreth could not identify, things that smelled complicated. Nora Vass heated something in a sealed pouch that turned the air in the mess room a deep, sharp orange for 20 minutes. Danny Prude ate the Coalition food without complaint, but she ate it the way someone eats a food they have decided to tolerate, not enjoy. Calduran drank black liquid from a battered metal container he carried himself. Vreth asked what it was. "Coffee," Duran said. "What does it do?" Duran considered the question with more seriousness than it seemed to deserve. "Makes things possible," he said, and went back to the mission maps. Vreth had obtained a translation matrix for human language before their arrival. It handled vocabulary well. It handled idiom poorly. The four humans spoke to each other in a shorthand that was technically English, but functionally opaque, abbreviations, references, half-sentences that the other three completed without prompting. When Leon said, "Kelm's got a 2-layer problem," Danny said, "Top or bottom first," and Kel said, "Top, then we on the bottom," and Nora said, "I'll pull the rotation," and that was an entire tactical conversation that took 11 seconds and left Vreth holding a translation that was literally accurate and completely meaningless. He brought a notepad the second day. He wrote down phrases he could not parse and asked Nora Voss about them during the morning brief. She answered every question with the patient precision of someone who had done this before, explained things to non-humans, built bridges across gaps that most people would not even notice. She was very good at it. On the third morning, Vreth asked the question that had been sitting in him since the shuttle bay. "Who leads this unit?" Nora looked at him. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just honest, the pause of someone actually thinking about the answer, rather than reaching for the automatic. "One. Whoever needs to," she said. Vreth wrote it down. He looked at it. "That isn't how command structure works," he said. "Not as a criticism. As a statement of fact, the way you state a physical law." "No," Nora agreed. "It isn't." She did not elaborate. He did not push. But that night he lay on his adjusted position gel platform and thought about it for a long time. Every military structure he knew operated on clear hierarchy because hierarchy was how you prevented paralysis under pressure. One voice. One decision. Everyone else executes. It worked because it eliminated the variable of disagreement at the wrong moment. The human team did not have hierarchy. They had something else, something he had no clean word for. A distributed sense of the situation. Each of them seemed to know, at any given moment, what the others were doing, and what needed doing next. Not through communication. Through something that looked from outside like instinct but was too consistent to be instinct. It was trained, he realized. They had trained this into themselves. They had practiced operating as a single thing with four independent minds until the seams between them were invisible. He found that more unsettling than the hierarchy question. On the fourth day, the mission briefing began in earnest. Vreth laid out the Karif station code, named Anvil, on the holographic display. Patrol rotations, entry points, guard density, the 6 prisoner coordinates buried somewhere in the intelligence hub at the station's core. Cal Duran stood at the edge of the display and asked 3 questions. They were very specific questions, the kind that could only come from someone who had already formed a plan and was checking whether the plan was still valid. The questions were about the service corridors on the station's secondary level, the timing gap in the patrol rotation between the east and south wings, and whether the Karif command officer had an office on site or rotated in from an external vessel. Vreth answered all 3. Cal nodded once and said nothing else. Leon Hatch, on the other side of the room, was studying the station schematic with one hand on his chin and was also somehow still slightly smiling at something private. Then, in the space between one breath and the next, the smile was gone. His eyes moved across the display with a focus that Vreth could only describe as the way a predator watches something it has already decided to catch. Then the smile came back. The switch was less than a second. Vreth looked away. He looked back at the display. He made himself concentrate on the mission parameters and not on the fact that the man standing 15 FT away seemed to exist in 2 different states, simultaneously, loose and laughing on the surface, somewhere entirely else underneath, and could move between them without any visible effort. That night Vreth filed his first preliminary report to Admiral Dasik. He wrote, "Initial assessment of human unit is ongoing. Team demonstrates high competence and strong cohesion. Integration with Coalition Command. Protocols will require additional time." He deleted the second sentence. He wrote instead, "I am not yet certain what I am looking at." He sent that. He was quiet for a while after. Outside the station, through the hole he could not see through, space was doing what it always did, holding everything, giving nothing away. In the room 2 corridors down, one of the 4 humans was laughing softly at something. Vreth did not know which one. He found he was not sure it mattered. The plan broke 12 minutes in. Not catastrophically. That was the part Vreth would remember. Longest not the breaking but the specific way it broke. Not a wall falling. 3 small cracks in 3 wrong places. An alert tripped 1 corridor ahead of schedule. A patrol rotation that moved 8 minutes earlier than the intelligence said it would. A service door on the secondary level that should have been on a 4-hour unlock cycle and was, for a reason nobody would ever know, locked permanently. 3 things. None of them fatal alone. Together they took the plan apart like water finding cracks in stone. Vreth registered all three in sequence and reached automatically for the abort signal on his comm unit. Calduran's hand was already on his wrist, not grabbing, just there. Duran looked at him with the flat, calm expression of a man who had already processed everything Vreth was processing and had come out the other side. He shook his head once. Slow. Certain. He did not say, "We're not done." He did not say, "Trust me." He said nothing. His hand left Vreth's wrist. He turned back to the corridor and began moving. The team moved with him. Vreth stood for 1-2 seconds in the dark of a Kareth service junction, 6 hours. From extraction, no air support, 3 things wrong and no plan left. Then he followed. The Kareth station was called Anvil because of its shape, a wide flat processing deck balanced on a narrow operational stem, everything built for function and nothing for comfort. The corridors were tight and low-ceilinged and lit in the deep amber red of Kareth environmental preference. Vreth's eyes had adjusted poorly. The 4 humans moved through the amber, dark like they had been born in it. Nora Voss was on point now, which had not been the original plan. The original plan had Leon Hatch on point through the east wing. He knew the entry geometry better. But the locked service door had closed, the east wing off, and Nora had shifted to point without anyone saying a word about it because the new route required reading the station's interior logic, real time, and that was her specific skill, and apparently everyone already knew that, so she moved and they followed. She walked differently in the corridors than she walked in open space. That was the only way Vreth could describe it. In open space, she had the regular movement of a person going somewhere. In the corridor, she had the movement of a person who lived there. Pace, posture, the angle of her head, all of it arranged into a single quiet statement that said, "This is my station, I belong here, I'm on my way somewhere, and I am not worried about it." She did not speak Kareth. She did not need to. The body language crossed the species line and landed on the other side, intact. 2 Kareth guards passed them at a junction, walking the opposite direction. Vreth stopped breathing. Nora did not break stride. She moved to the right of the corridor, the way a person moves to give space to someone going the other way in a familiar hallway. One of the guards glanced at. She did not look back. She kept walking. The kind of person who doesn't look back is the kind of person who has nothing to look back about. The guards passed, continued, did not raise an alarm. Vreth started breathing again. He made a note somewhere in the back of his mind to ask Nora later where she had learned to do that. He suspected the answer would be something short and not entirely satisfying. They reached the secondary level junction. Leon Hatch moved ahead of Vreth, pressed himself flat against the wall, and spent 7 seconds watching the intersection the way a scientist watches a variable. Patient, precise, already forming conclusions. Then he held up 2 fingers. 2 guards. Near side. He held up a flat hand. Wait. They waited. 40 seconds. Vreth counted. He was good at waiting. It was a trained skill. Patience was something you built in Coalition officer school, but this kind of waiting was different. This was silence that had intention. Inside it, the four humans stood in the corridor. Not moving, not fidgeting, not doing the small unconscious things that beings do when they are waiting and uncomfortable. They were still in the way that an object is still, not suppressing movement, genuinely at rest. It unsettled Vreth more than movement would have. The guards shifted. The intersection cleared for 90 seconds. Leon had already known it would. Vreth understood. He had been counting from the moment he started watching. They moved. They were through the intersection and into the access corridor before Vreth had consciously decided to go. A Carrot sentry appeared at the far end of the corridor, alone, moving toward them. No junction to duck into. No cover. 30 m of empty corridor between the sentry and the team, and the sentry was already looking their direction. Leon went forward. Vreth did not fully see what happened. It was very fast and very close, and it happened in the sentry's blind angle, and then the sentry was not standing anymore. Leon checked the corridor in both directions. He checked Danny Prute's position behind him. He exhaled. That was it. One breath. Then he was moving again. Vreth spent the next 40 minutes watching Leon for something, a shaken, the hands a different quality to his, silence, anything that indicated the weight of the previous 8 seconds had registered anywhere in his body. There was nothing. Not suppression. Not performance. Leon rolled his shoulder once, the way person rolls a shoulder that sat wrong, and kept moving, and at one point deep in the third junction where the smell of Carruth processing chemicals was sharp enough to sting, he turned to Danny and made a very quiet comment that Vreth has translated or rendered as a mild joke about the smell. Danny almost smiled. Vreth understood something then. Not fully. Just the edge of it. Leon had processed what happened at the end of that corridor. He had processed it in that one exhaled breath. Humans compress grief into very small spaces because they have had a great deal of practice, because they have been putting hard things into small containers for as long as any of them could remember, and the containers hold because they were built strong. The exhale was not nothing. It was everything. It was just very fast. They reached the outer edge of the intelligence hub with 41 minutes left in the window. 3 things had gone wrong. The team had not aborted. They had not regrouped or caucused or stopped to rebuild the plan from scratch. They had folded the 3 broken pieces into the shape of something new without stopping, without visible frustration, as if a plan going wrong was not a crisis but a material, something you worked with, not against. Vreth looked at the intelligence hub door. He thought about every coalition operation he had been part of where a single variable going wrong had triggered the abort protocol, because the abort protocol existed for exactly that reason. You protected your people. You did not push into a compromised situation. You pulled back, reassessed, returned with a better approach. The human approach was different. The human approach seemed to be the situation is always compromised. Build from there. He was not sure yet if that was brilliance or something that would eventually get all 4 of them killed. Calderon crouched at the hub door and checked his equipment. He looked up at Vreth. There was a question in his face, not, "Are you okay?" not, "Do you need a moment?" The question was simply, are you still in? Vref nodded. Cal turned back to the door. They went in. The intelligence hub had 23 guards and 1 command officer. Vref counted them on the thermal scan. Before entry, 23 was a number that, in any coalition tactical doctrine he had ever studied, meant you called for a larger team or you did not go in. 23 guards in a contained space with 1 entry point was a problem that required either overwhelming force or a situation where the guards never had the chance to become a coordinated unit. Calderon looked at the thermal scan for about 4 seconds. We go in fast, he said. Nobody gets a second to think. That was the entire plan. It worked the way a very simple machine works, not because it was elegant, but because it was exactly matched to the problem. The 4 humans entered through the hub's 2 access points simultaneously, which was possible only because Leon had spent the previous 11 minutes doing something to the secondary access lock that Vref's translator described as persuading it. They were inside before the nearest guard registered the entry sound. What followed did not look like what Vreth understood combat to look like. Coalition combat doctrine was about controlled fire lines, controlled positioning, controlled escalation. It was structured because structure was how you kept people alive inside chaos. What the 4 humans did was not structured in any way Vreth recognized, and yet it had a shape to it. Each of them moved through the space as if they could see the other 3 without looking at them. They did not collide. They did not cut each other's angles. The space between them changed constantly, and the change was always correct. It was over in less than 90 seconds. 23 guards and 1 command officer, and the only people who had fired a weapon were human. Vreth stood near the hub central console and tried to understand what he had just witnessed. It was not the speed, coalition shock. Troops were vast. It was not the precision, Dravian. Infantry were precise. It was the combination of those things with something he could not name. An absence of hesitation that was different from bravado. Bravado was a performance of fearlessness. This was something else. The fear was present, he could see it in Danny's jaw, in the way Cal's hand moved a half-second faster than it needed to when a guard came from the wrong angle. But the fear existed somewhere downstream of the decision-making. It informed but did not govern. The command officer was still standing. He had not fired. Vreth understood why. He had assessed the situation in the first 10 seconds and concluded correctly that opening fire would result in his own death before it produced any useful result. He was calculating, waiting for an angle. It was what Vreth would have done. Then he moved to the row of coalition prisoners at the far wall, 6 of them, thin and exhausted, secured to a long restraint rail, and he placed himself behind the nearest one, a female prisoner. She did not make a sound. The command officer said something in Kareth. Vreth's implant translated it cleanly. Terms: a negotiation. The humans would withdraw, the officer would allow them to leave. Standard hostage doctrine. Vreth had read the playbook. Everyone in every military in the galaxy had read the same playbook because the playbook worked. The hostage created hesitation, and hesitation was leverage, and leverage was a kind of power. Calderon looked at the officer for a moment. He did not raise his weapon. He did not move toward the officer. He did not negotiate. He did something none of Vreth's training had given him a word for. He turned to the prisoner, not to the officer, to the woman the officer was using as a shield. He looked at her directly, the way you look at a person you intend to have a real conversation with, and he asked her name. Calm, plain, the voice of someone who had time. The woman blinked. Her name was Carla. She said it like she hadn't said it in a long time and needed to remember how it sounded. Cal told her she was going home. The officer said something else. Cal did not acknowledge it. He kept his eyes on Carla. He asked her if she could walk. She said yes. He nodded and told her they were going to walk out together in a moment, and she should stay close to the woman on her left, and it was going to be fine. The officer had arrived with a hostage. He now had a witness. Everything he did from this point would be done in front of someone who was going home, who would tell people what she saw. The threat was still technically in his hands, but the shape of it had changed entirely. The frame around the situation had shifted, and the officer was standing in a different picture than the one he had prepared for, and his calculations, all his clean, sensible calculations, had no entry point for what was happening. He released Carla 38 seconds later. Vreth was not sure he could explain exactly why. He was not sure the officer could explain it either. It was not fear, and it was not logic. And it was something that Calderon had understood and deployed the way Leon had deployed a door charge, with the confidence of someone who had used this tool many times. Nora Voss was at the central console. The data drive was already running. The prisoner coordinates, the facility maps, the communication logs, everything the coalition had needed for 4 months was transferring in a quiet, patient progress bar on a screen that had belonged to the Kareth 8 minutes ago. Nora stood over the console and watched the progress bar. Her face was still. Then something on the screen stopped. Sorry. It was a prisoner log. A list of names, transfer records, status notations. She scrolled it with one finger. She stopped. She read a name. Vreth was watching her. He had been watching all 4 of them the entire time. It was all he could do, and he saw her read it. He saw the moment it landed. Something moved behind her eyes. Something large and very old, and it moved once, and then it was gone. She closed the log file. She finished watching the progress bar. The drive completed. She pulled it. She tucked it into her kit. She turned to Cal. Done, she said. Good, Cal said. That was all. Vreth stood very still. He had seen Nora's face for the half-second between the name and the closed file. He did not know whose name it was. He did not know what the status notation had said. He did not ask. He understood with a certainty that settled into him like something heavy, finding its place, that he was not supposed to ask, that the asking was not his to do. She had seen something in that log that mattered to her in a way he could not measure. She had held it for 1-2 seconds. She had closed the file and finished the job. He thought about his own training. In Coalition Officer School, they spent 3 weeks on emotional regulation, the management of feeling in high stress environments, the importance of controlled response, the discipline of setting aside personal reaction in service of the mission. They had methods for it. Structured breathing, cognitive reframing, designated decompression. Windows after difficult operations. The methods took 3 weeks to teach. Nora Vass had done the same thing in less than a second without any visible method on the far side of 6 hours of deep infiltration in enemy space, and then she had handed over the data drive and asked if they were ready to move. He understood then not everything but enough what dangerously calm under stimulus meant. It was not the absence of the feeling. It was a decision, made in advance, remade every time. The feeling went somewhere else. Somewhere it would be dealt with later. In private, in whatever small space. Humans set aside for the things they carry. The later gets heavy, Brett thought. Over time. He was certain of it. He followed them out of the hub and into the corridor and toward the extraction point, and he did not look at Nora Vass. Because some things you do not look at directly. Some things you understand by looking next to them. Outside, through the whole of the Kareth station, the extraction window was opening. In 3 hours they would be out of Kareth space. In 3 hours. They moved. The debrief room was too large for the number of people in it. That was standard coalition design. Oversized rooms signaling the importance of what happened inside them. A long table, high-backed chairs. Holographic display at the far end that was not currently in use. 7 members of the coalition tactical board sat on one side of the table. Admiral Dasik sat at the head. Commander Vreth stood at the front of the room alone with a single data tablet in his hand and 14 days of thinking behind his eyes. The formal report had already been submitted. The prisoner coordinates had already been acted on. 4 of the 6 facilities had been hit in the 72 hours following extraction. Prisoners recovered. Operation successful. The data drive Nora Vass had pulled from the Anvil Intelligence Hub had contained 3 months of Kareth internal communication that the coalition's analytical division was still working through. By every measurable standard, the mission had succeeded completely. The tactical board wanted to understand. So, Vreth looked at the room. He looked at the 7 faces watching him, senior officers, most of them older than him, all of them experienced, all of them holding the kind of institutional authority that had shaped coalition military doctrine for decades. He thought about how to begin. He decided to begin at the beginning. On the transit in, he said, I reviewed the human unit's personnel files. One more time. I was looking for a command structure, a hierarchy I could map onto something I already understood. He paused. I did not find one. I spent the first 3 days at base trying to identify it through direct observation. I could not. One of the board members, General Orith, who had the particular quality of skepticism that comes from very long experience, leaned forward slightly. All military units have hierarchy. Commander. That is a structural requirement of human special operations. Units do not function the way we define hierarchy. Vreth said. They have rank. They follow orders from their command structure at the strategic level. But inside an operation in the space between orders, they operate on something else. Something I am going to try to describe. And I want to say at the start that my language may not be adequate for it. The room was quiet. Every species in the coalition plans toward victory, Vreth said. We construct the desired outcome, we map the route to it, we assign resources, we account for variables. We plan from the assumption that the plan can succeed. And when it is threatened, when variables deviate, when things go wrong, the instinct is to pause, reassess, return to the plan, or pull back to safety. We do this because the gap between the plan and reality is where people die. He set the tablet down on the table. The human unit I was embedded with does not plan toward victory. They plan from loss. They begin with the assumption that things will go wrong, that the plan will break, that variables will deviate, and they build from that place. Their mental starting position is not the outcome they want. It is the worst version of what they are walking into. Orith sat back slowly. That is a doctrine of pessimism. No, Vreth said. That is what I thought at first. It is not pessimism. Pessimism expects failure. This is something different. It is the removal of surprise. When you have already accepted that things will go wrong, things going wrong does not interrupt your function. There is no gap between the plan and the reality, because the plan was always the reality. The broken version. The compromised version. The version where three things go wrong. 12 minutes in, and you do not reach for the abort signal. The room was very quiet now. Vreth told them about the corridor, the locked door, the patrol rotation that moved 8 minutes early. He told them about Kaldur's hand on his wrist and the single shake of the head, and the team moving before Vreth had processed the decision to follow. He told them about Nuravos walking through an active patrol zone in the posture of a person who belonged there. He told them about Leon Hatch and the exhale and the way the laughter came back 40 minutes later like nothing had been set down. He told them about Danny Prout. She is 22 years old, he said. She was born in a city that does not exist anymore. Her psychological evaluation says she is dangerously calm under stimulus. I read that phrase before the mission, and I thought it was a cautious warning. I understand now that it is the most precise description of a human soldier I have ever seen in a document. He looked at Orith. She is not calm because she is not afraid. She is calm because she has already been afraid, because she has already experienced the worst thing, the thing the rest of us are afraid is coming, and she came out the other side, and she knows now what it takes to do that. The calm is not a starting place. It is what you build on the far side of the worst place. She is 22, and she is already standing on the other side. Orith was quiet for a moment. You're describing a population that has suffered greatly. Yes, Vreth said. I am. He let that sit. A board member near the far end of the table, Admiral Shankara, who had spent 30 years in intelligence and had the particular quality of listening, that Mrs. Nothing spoke for the first time. Commander, in your assessment, what is the primary tactical advantage of the human special operations model? Vreth had prepared for this question. He had prepared 4 different answers. During the transit back to command, he discarded all 4 of them now. Fear, he said. Every species in the galaxy uses fear as a variable. We try to reduce it in our own soldiers. We try to maximize it in our enemies. We treat it as a force that acts on us. He paused. Humans have converted it into a direction. They are afraid and they move toward it. Not despite the fear. Because of it. The fear is the compass. It points at the thing that matters. He picked the tablet back up. I do not have a tactical recommendation that fits inside our existing doctrine. Frameworks. What I have is this: in 7 days of operation, the human unit I was embedded with produced outcomes that 4 months of conventional coalition effort could not. They did this with 4 people. And the reason they could do it with 4 people is not that they are stronger or faster or better equipped. It is that each of them has made a private decision, made it long before they were deployed, made it so many times it has become structural that the mission is worth the cost. He stopped. He thought about Nora at the console. The closed file. They carry a great deal, he said. They carry it in very small spaces, and they carry it without showing it, and they carry it for a long time. I do not know what the weight of that becomes eventually, but I know what it looks like from outside in the middle of an operation. When a person reads a name on a screen, that hits them like something physical, and then closes the file and finishes the job. The room was silent. Dasik at the head of the table said nothing. He had known. Vreth understood now that Dasik had known from the beginning, had known since Meridian Gate, and had sent Vreth not to evaluate the humans, but to see them, to stand close enough that the seeing went all the way in. The board members filed out slowly after the session closed. Quiet conversations. No one said what they were thinking directly. Dasik stayed. He stayed until the room was empty, and then he looked at Vreth across the long table and asked his one question. If the mission came again, would go? Vreth had expected the question. He had not expected how long it would take him to answer. He stood with it for a moment. He thought about the Amberdark corridors. He thought about Kalduran's hand on his wrist. He thought about the exhale. He thought about what it means to stand next to people who have already been to the worst place and come back, and what it does to your understanding of what is possible. Yes, he said. He said it simply, quietly, in the way that Kalduran said almost nothing, the way that the heaviest things go into the smallest possible space, because that is where they fit, and because you have to carry them somewhere. Dasik nodded. He looked at the coalition flag at the far wall, 12 species on it, 12 histories, 12 different understandings of what war costs and what it builds. He thought about what he had asked humanity to become when he filed that request 6 months ago. He thought about the answer humanity had already given long before he asked. The light in the room hung softly. The flag did not move. The door stayed closed, and the question that Dasik had been carrying since Meridian Gate, the one about what humanity was really underneath the files and the doctrine and the 11 soldiers who should have died and did not, sat open in the room with him. He had no answer that fit inside. Language. He suspected humanity had stopped waiting for one a long time ago.